right. Well, what that really means is Vicki and I get a break for 2 weeks. Just kidding. We're actually pretty fond of her. We like her. Well, good morning. I want to give a huge shout out to the 26 people who helped us out with fireworks this last couple of weeks. Well, it's 1 week. It feels like forever, but it's like only 1 week. That is the most volunteers we have ever had. Yeah. And it was a super successful year. Could not have done it without you. Now, there's something that happens in a fireworks booth. And for those of you that have volunteered in the past, you're going to identify with what I'm talking about. For those of you who have not yet, maybe this will spur you on to sign up next year. I don't know. But there's always something happening in a fireworks booth. Whether it's reuniting a lost child with their parent who didn't know that they lost their kid, or it's calling an ambulance for someone in need, or it's stopping people from breaking the law and trying to launder $100 bills that aren't real. Or, see, I'm selling it. I'm selling it as we go. Or bringing smiles to children's faces as their parents spend more money than they intended to spend. If you hang out in a fireworks booth long enough, you see it all. You see it all. And people ask a lot of questions in a fireworks booth. How much is that? What does it do? Do you have a bus schedule? Is it hot in there? Why do fireworks keep getting more expensive? Have you set off every firework in the booth? No, but I'm about to. Do you have any illegal fireworks? And I just don't. Round back. Meet me around back. One lady stopped by this year and said, I don't want to buy any fireworks. I just wanted to ask a question. And I said, well, what is it? She says, do you know how to get to the nearest McDonald's? But there's one question that rarely gets asked at a fireworks booth, and that is this. Do we really need that? Now, we're trying to make money. So that's not a question I'm posing to customers as they come up. But I think it's something that we silently ask when we look at the 10 Commandments, because when we get to number 6, and the one that says don't murder, I think we almost laugh it off. Maybe it's because we think in our heads, do we really need that? Like, do we really need God to write that one out? Like, isn't that one of the things that goes without saying? And if you're one of those that has to have that written out, you're probably not one of those that's reading the Bible anyway. Right? Am I the only one who's thought these thoughts? And so if I'm saying what you're thinking, then I want you to listen in this morning, because maybe you'll think a little differently about this commandment by the time we end. This series we are in is about the 10 Commandments, and we're highlighting this idea that behind every commandment, there is a principle of relationship that God wants us to understand. And in the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, the relationship principle was about priority. The second commandment, you shall have no idols. The principle was about purity. The third commandment, you shall not misuse God's name. The principle was about respect. In the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath. The principle was about time. With the fifth commandment, honor your parents. The principle was about honor. And then we get to the sixth commandment, and things get intense. Don't murder. In fact, in Exodus 20:13, it says it very clearly, you shall not murder. Now, I want to explain something at the outset here. This is different than you shall not kill. The Bible doesn't say you shall not kill. The old King James translated that way. But there is a difference between murder and killing. Murder means you take a life when you don't have the authority to take that life. God is the author of life. He is the one who is sovereign over life. He has all authority over human life. And in fact, right in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, God lets his views on this be known. And he says this, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. In other words, if you murder someone, your life should be taken. Why? Why does God feel this way? Because people bear the image and likeness of God. And because of that, there is a high value placed upon human life. And murder says, I don't value that human life. Murder says, I don't value the God who gave life to that person. And I'm going to take a life that I don't have the authority to take. And we all know that there are times in law enforcement or with military engaged in a war or the judicial system where they take a life. Let me just say that that is different than murder. In fact, the Bible implemented capital punishment, so understand that we are free today because men and women have fought for that freedom and they did not violate the sixth commandment by doing so. And so what is the relationship principle that is kind of behind this command of don't murder? Well, it's love. There is no love in murder. In fact, it is the opposite. There is hate. See, the Bible links murder to hate, and love is the opposite of hate. I want you to see this in 1 John 3:15. It says, everyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer. That's a link. That's a connection. And then see how it links the opposite of these to love. In Romans 13:9, it says, for the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. This is like, 6 through 10 of the commandments, right? And any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I know I don't look a day over 30. But I've actually been a youth pastor for about 23 plus years. And I've had the honor of walking with young people through different points of their life. And I want to introduce you to one of them this morning. Watch this. And now here we go. Oh. Sweet. Good job. Okay. Ow. And you go.
Really great experience. I met a lot of new friends, and we had a lot of fun. My favorite thing out of all of them is that I got really closer to God, and also they had a really good swimming pool. And I got really close to God because I was renewed again, and I asked His forgiveness.
All the past is for me. I don't know who I am. Is there love I'm searching for? I just can't understand. Why that I can't find it? Is it even real? I've seen it in the movies. All so for real. The many choices I have to make. So many problems I have to face. But now you're there beside me, my worries go away. Now that you are here, I know there's no mistake.
Nearly 8 years ago, I had to walk through one of the biggest ministry challenges of my life. Vicki and I were on staff at a large church in Southern Cal, and it was a Tuesday night. I was preaching at our young adult ministry, and Vicki got a phone call, and she left the room, and several minutes later she came in, and she interrupted me while I'm preaching. And that's not normal, you know? And so I said, excuse me, and we stepped outside, and I was about to get kind of upset that she had interrupted while I'm preaching, and there was tears in her eyes, and I could tell that something was up. And so as we stepped outside, Vicki informed me that she just got a phone call, and the grandmother of the girl that I just introduced you to had called Vicki and told her that the police had just found her, and she was dead, and she was murdered, and she was 15 years old. Her name is Destiny. She had a troubled home life. Her mom was a drug addict. Her mom was in and out of jail. Her older brothers struggled with drugs and gangs, and so she lived with her grandmother, and her grandmother brought her to church each week. And every Sunday night, and she came, Destiny came and was a part of our junior high ministry. She went to snow camp, and she went to summer camp, as you saw in the video. And she was trying to figure out life, and she was trying to figure out God, and she was trying to figure out where she fit in and all that. But it was hard. The year before she was murdered, she had stopped coming to church. And she got in with a bad crowd. She started engaging in some of the things her older brothers were involved in, and her mom. And through that all, she decided that she didn't want to live with her grandmother anymore, and so she ran away. And she ended up in a neighboring town with a group of drug dealers who welcomed her in with open arms. And then it wasn't long that she was murdered. 49-year-old lady was the ringleader. She owned this house, and she got 4 men in their 20s, one of whom was her son, to carry out her plan to murder that little girl. They gave her a lethal dose of drugs. They tied her up with duct tape. They beat her with a baseball bat. They tied sweatpants around her neck. They zipped her up in a duffel bag, drove her to another town where they dug a pit, threw her in, and set her on fire. They caught all of them. 4 out of the 5 received life without parole sentences. One of them made a plea deal and got 15 years to life with possibility of parole. Now, that's not a normal thing. Murder is not an everyday part of life. It's horrific. It is evil. And for most of us in this room, it is not a daily concern. At least I hope it's not. Yet, truth be known, that no one just one day decides to do something horrible and evil like that. There's a path that one sets on to where you get to the point where you read about it, you see it, and that knot, that pit gets in your stomach. And that path that you get set on, it's not as cliche, it's not as simple as just saying, well, if you do drugs and you get in gangs, then that's how it happens. Rather, it's an issue of the heart. It starts in the heart. The issues that lead you to something as horrific as I just described begins in the heart. And when they're not dealt with and when they're not addressed, it can lead to something as tragic as I just described. So what comes before murder? My first point is this: hate comes before murder. Let's turn to Genesis 37, and it's the story of Joseph. And I want you to see the progression of Joseph's brothers as they get to the point where they are contemplating murdering Joseph. In verse 4, it says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers. So start in the family, feeling as though someone was loved or appreciated or cared for more than them. And they hated them. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Verse 5, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, what does it say? They hated him even more. Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired. They planned to kill him. Why did they make plans to kill Joseph? Why did they conspire to murder Joseph? Because they hated him. Let me show you in the law, Deuteronomy 19, verse 11 and 12, it says this, but if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and attacks him and strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, then the elders of this city shall send and take him from there and hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. It's talking about capital punishment for murder. And it's showing that someone hated someone else and it led to them murdering them. We know that he murdered the neighbor. Why? Because he hated him. And the difference we can see is in Joshua verse 5. It says this, if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hands because he struck his neighbor unknowingly and did not hate him in the past. Here's the flip side. If it was unintentional, it wasn't murder. The way they determined if it was murder or not is if they hated the person. Hate is such a strong thing. And the Bible's onto something here because in our culture, we connect hate to murder. One fella on the Urban Dictionary, this isn't like the official dictionary, but just people saying how they define hate, define it this way. When you dislike someone so much that if you and the other person were in an empty room and there was a knife in the middle of the room, one or both would be dead. That's how you know you hate somebody. Another one described this way. When you see the person, your blood often pumps faster, your arms and your muscles get tense, an amazing amount of dislike aimed at them, and you wouldn't care if they died. Sometimes you will often get the sudden urge to murder them, no matter how aware you are of the consequences. See, once you don't care about the consequences, it's not a difficult jump to act upon hate. Hate comes before murder. But what comes before hate? Anger. Anger comes before hate. Before you hate someone, you get angry at them. The very first murder in the Bible was because of anger. In Genesis 4:3-5, it says, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very, what? Angry. And his face fell. And in verse 8, it says, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. He was angry. And so he killed him. If murder is the fruit, then anger is the root. Cain's anger was pointed at his brother, family. This family. And in similar ways, isn't it true that our anger sometimes flares up against the people we know best and the people that are around us the most and the people that we will tell everyone else that we love so deeply? Anger is an emotion. Is it possible to be angry and not sin? Yes. Matter of fact, there's a verse that says, be angry and do not sin. It is possible. So anger is not a sin, but rather it is what you do with it. I mean, have you ever known someone who has a tendency to blow up at other people? I mean, maybe it's you and you have a tendency to blow up at other people. The reason why we do that is because anger that's unresolved, it's unresolved anger that's sitting in us and it's causing us to explode. Think about it this way. There's water in a pot. And if you turn the heat up on the stove, what happens to that water? It boils over. You let it sit long enough, you turn the heat up high enough, it will boil over. But if you put a pot onto the stove and there's no water in it, you can turn that heat up as high as you want and nothing's going to boil over. Why? Because there's nothing in it. And the reason why we blow up is because there's unresolved anger in our lives. And if we can get that anger out and resolve it, then when you go through a tough time, you won't blow up because there's not any anger in there. We've got to resolve it. Hate comes before murder. Anger comes before hate. But what comes before anger? An offense. An offense. Cain was offended at God, and he was offended at Abel. It offended him that God accepted Abel's offering and not his. That's why he got angry. Check it out, Matthew 24:10, and watch this progression. It says this, and then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. They're offended, and now they hate people. Check out what happened to Jesus. Mark chapter 6, verse 2. It says, on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. I want you to remember that word astonished. We're going to come back to it. It said, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done in his hands? Speaking of Jesus. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? In other words, we know them. And then it says, and they took offense at him. Now, this word astonished doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. When I think astonished, I think of, wow, amazed. But in the Greek, it doesn't mean amazed. It actually means to strike or to expel by a blow, to drive out. And so Jesus began to teach, and people got angry. Why? Because he was just a carpenter who grew up in their town. It offended them that Jesus had all these people following him, and all these people, and he has such wisdom. And he's just a carpenter. And they got so offended, it says they were astonished. And this is what that means. They wanted to hit him. They wanted to beat him up. They wanted to kick him out of town. This happened another time in Luke chapter 4. Jesus goes to his hometown and he goes into the synagogue. He goes into the church and he reads from Isaiah this passage about the Messiah. And he says in Luke 4:18, he says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, the recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he closed the book and he went and sat down. And he said, the prophecy has been fulfilled and you're hearing it today. So in essence, he was saying, drop the mic, boom, the Messiah, I'm him. And what does it say? It says they were astonished and they were offended. And they're all, he's just a carpenter. He put in my patio last year. And he's showing up in here and he's saying this. Now he thinks he's the Messiah. Luke 4:28, listen what it says. It says, when they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. They rose up and drove him out of the town, brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they could throw him off the cliff. They got angry. Why? Because they were offended. Why? Because he didn't meet their expectations. Which brings me to my next point. We got hate comes before murder. Hopefully no one comes to the point of murder, but you might hate someone. Or you might reword it, I extremely dislike that person. Just because you don't use the word hate doesn't mean it ain't in there. That's free. It's not even in my notes. But what causes hate? Anger does. You get angry at someone and you don't resolve it correctly. And so now you hate them. What causes anger? An offense. What causes an offense? Unmet expectations. Unmet expectations. Have you ever thought things were going to turn out a certain way? and then they don't turn out that way, and you get upset about it. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but my guess, just my uneducated guess, is that every single hand in this room would shoot up. Because we got expectations in our life. Even those of us who say, well, I don't have expectations now because I don't want to get hurt by having expectations. You got expectations. Check it out, Luke chapter 7, verse 18. It's a moment where John the Baptist had the same thing happen to him. He had some expectations and they weren't met, and it makes him go to a certain place. Listen to this. It says, the disciples of John, that's John the Baptist, reported all these things to him, and John, calling 2 of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, sent them to Jesus, saying, are you the one who's going to come, or should we look for another? Now think about this for a moment. John the Baptist is Jesus' cousin. John the Baptist was filled with the Spirit in his mother's womb when Jesus' mom, Mary, walked into the room when Jesus was in her womb. So there's a connection. And Jesus started his ministry. It was John the Baptist who pointed at Jesus and said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. John the Baptist is the one that when Jesus came to be baptized by him, said, no, I shouldn't baptize you. You should baptize me. What is he saying through all this? You're the one. Jesus is the one. He's the one. And they came to John the Baptist later and said, you know that Jesus you baptized? Well, he's got his own spot up the river. And he's baptizing people too. He's baptizing more people than you're baptizing. We've seen the records. They posted them. And John replied, I told you I'm not the one. I'm not the one. I told you he's the one. And then there's that famous verse in John 3:30 that says, he must increase, but I must decrease. What's he saying? He's the one. It's not about me. But then he sends 2 of his disciples to Jesus and asks, are you the one? Like, what's going on? Well, what happens here is John is now in prison. He's in prison because he's been saying Jesus is the one. And he's in prison, and Jesus comes to his town. He comes to the same city that he's in prison in. And so he sends these 2 disciples to go to Jesus, and they ask Jesus, are you the one? And Jesus doesn't even answer these 2 guys at first. He just starts healing a whole bunch of people. And then he says this in Luke 7:22. He says, he answered them, go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. The poor have the good news preached to them. And listen to this. Blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Let me put it another way. John is in prison for saying he's the one. Then Jesus comes to his town, and he doesn't even have time to visit his cousin in jail. Jesus had been in town for 7 days. He'd been there a week. He could have got him out of jail. And John's out, doesn't he know I'm in jail? You go tell John. You go tell him, cousin John wants to know. The one who's in prison right now and having to send people because I can't get there because of the shackles and the locks and the door and the... You tell him, I want to know, are you the one? And Jesus says, you go tell cousin John, the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is him who doesn't get his feelings hurt, who doesn't get offended because I'm not doing what you want me to do. Kind of strong, isn't it? Unmet expectations cause offenses. He had an expectation that Jesus was going to come and get him out of jail, or at least come see him. At least come talk to him. And when that expectation wasn't met, listen, I'm going to help you. We have an expectation that our friend is going to do something and they don't do it. And we get offended. We have an expectation that our employer is going to do something and they don't do it. And we get offended. We have an expectation that our pastor is going to do something and he doesn't do it. And we're offended. It's amazing the things that we will get offended over. I was working on my message yesterday. And I was expecting to go home and spend time just relaxing and chilling with my family. And I get home and I discover that my garage door is jammed. Cable comes off, the wheels are off, the rails are bent. It is just a mess. It shouldn't be like kitty corner. And my expectation of a relaxing, time at home was gone. And I'm dealing with the situation. And as I start thinking about it, I start to get offended because I had an expectation that I was going to go home and everything's going to be different. And I get offended and I say, well, why is this happening to me? Why can't I just have one thing go right? Why are things always a challenge? And I'm just going to sidestep for a second and just tell you the truth. I was having a pity party. Because I have more than one thing going right in my life. Not everything in my world is a challenge. Sometimes garage doors, it's a 20-year-old garage door. But having a pity party is not the best thing to do when you're trying to fix something. And as I was busy getting offended, I started to get angry. And I'm pushing, and I'm pulling, and I'm doing all this to the stupid door. And let me just ask you a question. It's a yes or no. Do you think I made it better or I made it worse? No need to respond. And worse yet, my family comes out into the garage trying to, do the supportive circle around. And the supportive circle, do you have the circle of support? I'm just going to tell you, I ruined the circle of support yesterday. Because if you are within a certain radius of someone who is angry, they're going to feel it. And my point is this, is here I am trying to teach about how easy it is to go down that path. I'm telling you what goes before this and what goes before this. I had just finished mapping all this stuff out. And not 15 minutes had passed from me completing my message, and all it takes is a garage door, and I allow simple unmet expectations trip me up. In the Greek, the word for offense is scandalon. Scandalon. It means stumbling stone. Somebody does something, and it's scandalous to us, and it becomes a stumbling stone to us. Scandalon is used to represent, have you ever seen those traps? It has like the box, and there's that stick holding it up, and then there's that little piece of string, and there's someone hiding behind the bushes, right? That stick, that stick that's propping up that, is a trigger called a scandalon. That stick is the trigger. That's an offense. That is called a scandalon. And Satan sets a trap for us, and he sets a little scandalon right there, this little offense that we go in, and that offense gets taken, and we get trapped, and we get snared. The mastermind of Destiny's murder, this woman, her name was Rhonda Wistow. She was trapped. She was developing a criminal enterprise, and she let Destiny stay at her house, and she was expecting Destiny to fall in line. Only she didn't really know Destiny that well. And she was a 15-year-old girl. Little spitfire, a lot of attitude, a lot of things I loved about her. But Destiny felt, when she felt something, she said it. And so she was warned. But she kept being mouthy, and she didn't meet Rhonda's expectations. And it wasn't long before Rhonda discovered that Destiny had stolen from her, and Rhonda took offense. Destiny was mouthy, and she took things. And she felt like she was disrespected by this 15-year-old little girl. And the result was that it angered her, so much so that she grew to hate her. And it was in that hate that she devised a plan to get rid of her. And that horrific and gruesome plan was to murder her. It can snare you. It can trap you. It can trip you up. So what's the relationship principle behind the command to not murder? It's love. Well, there's no love in murder. There's hate. We know where unmet expectations and offenses and anger and hate lead us. But how do we get to where God is trying to lead us? How do we get to love? What comes before love? Well, what comes before love is forgiveness. Forgiveness. Matthew 5:43 says, "You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you." How in the world can you love someone that hates you? Or that is your enemy? Well, I'm going to tell you, it is simple to say. But it is challenging to live out. And that is, you got to forgive them. Let's look at Jacob and Esau. Jacob steals Esau's birthright and blessing, and look how Esau responds. It's Genesis 27, verse 41. It says, "Now Esau hated." Hate. We know where hate goes, right? He hated Jacob because of the blessing of which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then," in other words, once they're over, it's on. "I will kill my brother Jacob." I hate him for what he did. I'm going to kill him. He hated him, so he was going to kill him. Hate leads to murder. But watch how forgiveness leads to love. Fast forward 20 years. 20 years. Well, he said, "Jeff, that's a long time. I'm sure they would have resolved it much sooner. Because none of us would hold on to things for 20 years. See what I did there? Okay. 20 years go by. Jacob is going back to his homeland. Listen to Genesis 31:1. It says this: "Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him." Now, what would you think if the fella who hates you and who has said publicly, "I'm going to kill you," what would you think? He's coming at you along with 400 fellas. Watch what happens. Verse 4, he says, "But Esau ran to him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept." How did Esau go from hating him and wanting to murder him to loving him and embracing him? It's because he had forgiven him. You can read the whole story there in the end of Genesis. It's because he'd forgiven him. It's the only way. It's the only way. Forgiveness comes before love. But what comes before forgiveness? Grace. Grace comes before forgiveness because that is in essence what forgiveness is. It's giving grace to someone. And to give grace, you've got to receive grace. Matthew 10:8 puts it this way: "Freely you have received, freely give." In other words, if you feel like you have to earn forgiveness from God, you will make other people earn forgiveness from you. But once you catch grace and you understand, I am forgiven freely, and I didn't deserve to be forgiven, then you'll forgive others that don't deserve to be forgiven. When God forgave you, He released you. He released you from the punishment of sin. He released you. He released you from judgment. And when you truly forgive someone, it means you release them. But you say, well, they were wrong. Well, of course they were wrong. That's why you need to forgive them. You don't forgive people who are right. You don't forgive people that are good, do you? You don't forgive people that are nice to you. You forgive people that are mean to you and hurt you and offend you. You forgive them. See, do not murder. Yes, it's about not committing murder. Do we really need God to write that out? Well, maybe we do. Because it's also about falling into the trap, about getting caught into the snare where we can hate people and we can be angry with them and we can be offended and we cannot forgive them. Hate leads to murder. Forgiveness leads to love. As we wrap up our time together and the worship team comes, would you just stand with me for a moment? I want to share with you one last thought. It's in Romans chapter 9, verse 33. It says this, as it is written, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. See, Paul here is talking about Jesus, and he's saying that Jesus is either going to be a stone that you stumble over or a rock that you build your life upon. People either stumble over him or they build on him. But think about this. You're in a relationship with someone. A friend, a spouse, a family member. And they offend you. Here's what they actually did. When they offended you, here's what they did. They left a rock in your path. They left a rock in your path. And as you come up to that, you have a choice. You see that rock, and you have a choice. You can either stumble over it and get tripped up and start down this other path we've talked about, or you can choose to step over it. Or here's something else you can do. You can pick that rock up and you can carry it with you. And you can show everybody else. Did you see what they did to me? They left this right in my path. Can you believe that? Can you believe what they did? How long ago did they put that rock in your path, my friend? I don't know. But I think a lot of us are carrying a lot of things. And maybe it's time to put them down. Maybe it's time to step over them. Maybe it's time to choose God's way. This morning we have some choices to make. Maybe you've been struggling with trying to process how to deal with unmet expectations. You thought things were going to go this way, but they didn't. And it's led to you taking up an offense. And the more you think about it and the more you stew over it, the more angry you become. And it's leading you down the wrong path, my friend. In fact, you might feel it's easy for you to lose your temper when things don't go your way. It may feel like you are angry all the time. You may have even had someone come up to you and ask why you are so upset and angry all the time. And people talk about how there is a chip on your shoulder. It's easy to excuse it away. I'm just really stressed lately. I'm just really tired. I got a really big schedule. It's easy to say, well, that's just my culture. It's just the way I am. But if we're to be honest, it's a heart issue. And God is saying if this relationship is going to work, then we're going to have to deal with some issues of the heart. Maybe it's time to resolve some of the unresolved stuff in our life. Because I'll just be honest with you, time is not a healer. Space is not a healer of that. Ignoring does not make it go away. A forced smile does not make it better. Maybe it's time to do this God's way and give grace and work through the process to forgive and to choose to step over the offense, to set that rock down and not get tripped up by it anymore. Maybe it's time to stop stumbling over God and start a relationship with Him. Maybe it's time to stop making excuses and surrender your life to Him. And as you receive God's forgiveness and understand what it is like, you'll be able to more easily forgive others and live like He intended. I don't know what it is for you, but maybe it's time to figure out our next step. I'm going to pray, and the altars are open. If you want to simply come and find a place and have a conversation with God, the altars are open. If you want to come and have someone pray with you and over you, the altars are open. If you want to come and you want to worship and just ask God to speak into your heart this morning, I'm going to pray. And then we're just going to take a moment and allow God to do some things in our world. Heavenly Father, we thank you. We thank you that you care about us, that you love us, no matter what's going on in our world. Father, some of us in this room, we've got some stuff. Some of it's unresolved. And as we've heard this message this morning, God's speaking to our heart. How should we respond? What is our next step? Maybe there's some things I need to do. Maybe there's some steps I need to take. God, would you just make that known in our heart? Maybe I need to find someone and have them agree with me, to help me, to have the courage and the bravery to take the next step. Maybe I just need to come and just be in your presence for a moment this morning before I hit those glass double doors and engage with the world again. Can we just pause for a moment? And as we contemplate this sixth commandment, say, God, what are you speaking to us? In Jesus' name. As the worship team plays, the altars are open.
God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. And God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. to do. And God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom. You know just what to do. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. And I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. And I will love you, Lord, my strength. Oh, and I will love you, Lord, my shield. And I will love you, Lord, my rock. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. Forever all my days, I will love you, God. I will love you, God. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Hallelujah, our God reigns. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Forever all my days. Hallelujah, 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 our God reigns. Oh, hallelujah, our God reigns. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Forever all my days. Hallelujah. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Oh, and hallelujah, our God reigns. And hallelujah, our God reigns. Forever all my days. Hallelujah. Forever all my days. Hallelujah. God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me vision to see things like you do. And God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom. You know just what to do. And God, I look to you. I won't be overcome. Give me vision to see things like you do. And God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom. You know just what to do. And I will love Forever all my days, I will love you, God. Forever all my days, I will love you, God.
You know, this morning, I don't think you have to be super spiritual to realize that God's doing something in people's hearts. And we need more of that. Because what is it ultimately? It's not the outside actions, as horrific and tragic as they can be. Those can cause damage. But it's an issue of the heart. And if we can get our heart right, and if we can work on what does it say? All the issues of life flow from our heart. And so as God was putting out the 10 Commandments, and he's saying, why does he have to write that out? Because it all comes back to an issue of the heart. He's saying, hey, can we pause? Can we take a minute? Because we're holding on to some things. We're starting down a path we shouldn't be going down. That's not how I've intended for us to live. There's a better way. Grace, forgiveness, love. And I know that as people who have lived unmet expectations, offenses, anger, hate, grace, forgiveness, and love is a whole lot better. And it's the kind of life I want to be living. I'm not there, but it's the kind of life I want to be living. And look around. We're not just neighborhood church. We're a family. And we are on this path together. Grace, forgiveness, love. That's his way. Let me pray a blessing over you this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for each and every one in this room. There are some in this room who are just kind of standing back and contemplating this whole thing. They're just soaking it all in. And Father, I pray that you would draw near to them and help them to navigate this in such a way that this becomes alive to them. That there is a better way. It's your way. And help us to become better at living out what your way actually is. Because as what's been demonstrated this morning is that we've all got some heart issues today. There's some things we got to work out. Life has taken us for a ride. We have been ensnared by that scandalon. We have picked up some rocks along the way. We have not been as efficient at stepping over them and employing this grace and forgiveness that you so freely give to us. But Father, may this morning be another reset. Say, God, can we come at this again? Would you forgive me this morning for some of the things that I've done? And God, would you help me to give that same forgiveness to others who have hurt and wronged and done things to me? Can you teach me a little bit more of how to overlook offenses and not hold on to them? Can you teach me some more about how to not sin in my anger? Can you help me live out this life that you've called us to live? God, I pray your blessing upon everyone in this room this morning. May you cause your face to shine upon them and bless them as they live this life for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.